You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
Amazing times where you're actually in the garage during the race. You know, you're part of all that excitement. You're under the podium when the Ferrari team wins. You know, you're celebrating your driver. It's a crazy world of people. This traveling circus that travels the world pretty much non-stop from March to November, and goes to 4 continents. So within 5 years, I managed to work with 4 world champion drivers. I think it is an incredible sport, and there's a real passion for people who are F1 fans.
Hello, you're very welcome to an Expat Lives special. You just heard my guest there, Annie Kennedy, the international sports marketeer, talking about her time working for Ferrari in Formula 1. Annie left Ireland in the 90s straight after studying in DCU. Since then, Annie has had an eventful and high-octane career working in sports marketing in some great companies including Uefa, FIFA, Eurosport, Formula 1, and with Shell on the Ferrari Formula 1 team, and also with Shell throughout Africa. She tells some great tales of life working as an expat throughout the world. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you now. Welcome to the podcast, Annie. You have been all over the world. You're a proper Expat Lives person. You've worked in London, Switzerland, you've worked in Africa, you've worked with Formula 1, Eurosport, and loads more. You are in Switzerland now. You're based in Switzerland, right?
I'm based in Switzerland, yeah. And funnily enough, for somebody who travels a lot and has worked all over the world, I've been in Switzerland for 18 years now. But interestingly, always in roles where I'm traveling a lot.
And before that, you were in London. Am I right in saying that? How long have you been out of Ireland? Have you been out of Ireland longer than you were in Ireland?
Yeah, do you know what? It was never planned, but when I left Ireland, the day after I finished my last exam in my finals in college, I left Ireland and I never came back.
Wow.
And it was never planned. I mean, I remember coming back for our graduation, you know, and we went to the same college, so we saw each other graduation, yeah. And then 2 days after graduation, I was gone again, and I moved to France, and so then lived in France for 3 year, lived in London for 2 years, and I've been in Switzerland now for 18 years since. I always thought that I'd come back to Ireland at some point, and now I don't really know. It's really hard to know because Ireland changes a lot, you change a lot, and in the end, you're a different person.
And do you notice that then? Do you feel like a foreigner now when you come back to Ireland?
A little bit. I mean, my family slag me all the time and tell me I'm more Swiss than the Swiss, which I don't know. That's not always a compliment from them. And I find Ireland very different from the Ireland that I left, you know, and I suppose you become used to a completely different way of working and living and behaving even.
In your blood, isn't it? You're a family of your travellers.
Well, it's funny, yeah. It was only when I was thinking about this chat that we were having, and I was doing a bit of kind of looking at, you know, our family, and we wouldn't be kind of known for being a mad traveling family, but I realized, like, between me and my siblings, we've got about 8 languages, and from lots of different countries. So there's Chinese, there's Japanese, there's Greek, there's Portuguese, French, German, Spanish, Irish, of course, and that's really just from all of us just living in lots of different countries. So you know, I have a huge family, Fergal. I have 10 siblings, and I suppose by the time I left home, that we were already on about 4 continents.
Wow.
And that was at the age of 18. And then I had I think a huge influence on all of us was one of my aunts, my mother's sister. She was a Spanish teacher. She actually was a teacher in Ennis for a while, and she traveled the world. Whenever she had her holidays, you know, and she had long holidays being a teacher, she was traveling all over the world, and she was really passionate about languages. So sadly, she died very, very young. But by the time she died, she was fluent in 6 languages, and she spoke 8 languages. And that included Russian, it included Romanian, you know, a lot of very random languages for a woman from the west of Ireland. So, I always remember she used to write letters home all the time, because she for the last 10 years of her life, she lived all over the world in different countries. And she used to write letters home to my mother all the time. And she was an incredible writer, and she was so descriptive, and she'd describe people and places and situations and cultures and funny stories of confusions and, from language, errors and things like that. And it really sparked my imagination, and I think probably the rest of the family too. And I just thought, that's really what I want. I really want to have that kind of life.
In Switzerland now, where in Switzerland are you?
So I'm in a place called Zug, which is, it's central Switzerland. It's about half an hour from Zurich. It's kind of between Zurich and Lucerne, if you've ever heard of Lucerne.
Yeah,
Zug is an interesting place. It's the low tax haven in the low tax country, of Switzerland. So Zug, it attracts a lot of multinationals. It's a bit like the Ireland of Europe. Zug is the Ireland of Switzerland. And so you have 187 nationalities living in Zug, out of a population of less than 30,000.
Wow.
In the canton or the county of Zug. And it's really multinational, which I love about it. And it's in a beautiful location. So it's quite low lying, but it's surrounded by lakes and mountains. Zug is on a lake itself, and it's surrounded by mountains. So from every point, you're seeing these beautiful mountain ranges. So for example, from our balcony, we can see the Eiger, the Monk, and the Jungfrau, on a clear day, which are off in the Bernese Oberland. So yeah, beautiful place to live. I'd definitely recommend it.
So is it skiing in the winter and hill walking in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, so if you love the outdoors, Switzerland is for you. If you don't like the outdoors, I would say you'll die of boredom in Switzerland. So if you like skiing, if you like biking, if you like hiking, if you like water sports, it's an amazing place to be. And you get at least 6 months of sun in the year. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm still there, is it's near enough to home that I can come home, regularly and see the family that are still in Ireland. But, you have a really good climate. It's a very dry climate.
And the three of your jobs mean to me that you must be mad into sport, because you've worked for UEFA, you've worked for Eurosport, and you also work for Formula One.
Yeah, and Fergal, I'm really going to disappoint you now. I am not. I've had every man's dream job like 3 or 4 times in my life, and I'm actually not that passionate about sport. I'm really passionate about sports marketing and about sponsorship and about the passion that people have for sport. But I'm not a mad sports fan. Is that a terrible thing to say?
Not at all. And maybe it makes the jobs easier then. You're focusing on the marketing side of it.
Completely.
So which one came first? Was it Eurosport first?
The first one was Eurosport, and it's funny. People often ask me, I had a 20-year career in sports marketing, and they say, "God, you must have had. Did you have that planned? And was that what you really wanted?" I got into Eurosport completely by accident. I was living in Paris. I had just done a year of what's called the EOP, which is the European orientation program, I think, which a lot of languages and marketing graduates in DCU did. And I had worked for Bordi Shkiwara, and I was trying to support Irish seafood exporters. And when that year was up, I was sitting there going, "What will I do now?" And another Irish friend was working for Eurosport, and she said, "Oh, there's a job in the marketing department. Are you interested?" So absolutely. And that's how I got into sports marketing. And so I worked in Paris for Eurosport for 2 years. And then I moved to London, and I was there also for 2 years.
Just before we go to London, quick. So what did you love living in Paris?
I absolutely loved it. Yeah. I think Paris is very special.
Were you like Emily in Paris? Were you like wearing berets and fancy outfits going to work?
Do you know what's funny? I was reading about that recently, and I was reading about how angry the French were about it. But all the stereotypes I read about that are covered in there, I came across all of them. Yeah. No, I love Paris because Paris can be whatever you want it to be. It's everything to everyone, and it's it's such a special city. It's so beautiful. I was laughing. I was telling someone recently I did the bateau mouche, the boat trips down the river where you have the commentary. I did that about 18 times in 3 years.
Did you?
And by the end, I used to be able to give the commentary off by heart, with all the tourists and all the visitors I had.
But it
But
is
no,
one of
I
the,
love Paris. I would actually go back. I'd go back
would
to
you?
Paris in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Wow. And what is it? It's just magical city. It's one of those places you picture yourself walking along the street going to
Yeah,
work, I'd say.
you're walking along, and you could be in a really rough area of Paris, right, where people would say don't go there, and you look around and you see beautiful buildings, and you just you pop into a little bakery or a cafe, and the food is just divine. And I think what I loved about Paris as well is it's all there's a lot of local shops and a lot of local shopping. You go out on a Saturday morning and you wander around and you go to the little veg shop and buy your veg, and then you go to the butchers, and the French have managed to keep that alive, just shopping local and supporting small businesses. And I love that about Paris.
Yeah. And then so London is probably a culture shock, is it? Or is it going from one to the other?
London, do you know what's mad is I was really scared before moving to London, because I remember thinking, God, it's going to be a big bad city, and it's going to be so big, I'm going to be overwhelmed, and how am I going to survive and find my place? And actually, I ended up living right in the center of London, in what's called NoHo and Charlotte Street, right beside. Do you know where the BT Tower is?
Yeah, yeah.
Right beside there. And I had an absolute ball for 2 years. I was living in a shared. It was kind of a hovel. Like like I wouldn't walk into it now. It was like disease-ridden, kind of horrible place. But
Great
we had.
location though.
It was a mad location, and there were 5 bedrooms, and those bedrooms turned over. Each one turned over about twice, during the time I was there. And we just had some mad people living with us, and great experiences. And I walked everywhere. I worked in Covent Garden, so I'd walk to work. I'd walk to go out at night, walk home, and I was near Regent's Park, and I just had a ball. I remember Eurosport gave me a moving allowance. I think at the time it was probably about £2,000 or something, to kind of move me from Paris to London. And normally you'd use it to buy furniture, or you'd use it to set yourself up in your new place. And guess what I spent it on? I partied nonstop for about the first 4 or 5 months, and that was my moving allowance. So it certainly allowed me to integrate pretty quickly.
Yeah, you put it to good use to settle in.
Yeah.
And what were you doing with Eurosport then?
So when I was in Paris, I was it was a marketing role. So it was mainly creating campaigns to promote the channel, and we were and to both to consumers and also to advertisers. And we were in about 10 countries. So everything I was doing, we were creating in 10 languages, and that was really interesting as well, because you're translating copy, and you're trying to translate meaning and culture and all of that. In London, then I was working on British Eurosport, which is like a British feed of the channel. And we were doing a lot. It was much more of a kind of a business to business role, where we were doing a lot with the cable operators. And at the time, digital TV had literally just begun, but you still had the old cable operators like NTL and TeleWest and all of these. So we were doing a lot to kind of get them to promote our programming, to push to show more programming. So that's pretty much what I was doing.
Is that how you got into UEFA then? Through Eurosport?
That is, yeah, kind of. I was headhunted for a role at UEFA. Just randomly got a call from a sports headhunter, and like when you work in sports marketing, it's a really small world, because it's quite specialized and everybody knows each other. So I got a call one day, and they said, "Would you like to move to Switzerland?" And I thought, "Oh, sure, why not? Like, give it a go." So I decided to take it. I obviously had to interview and everything, and I decided to take the job. And I said, "I'll do 3 years, and then I'll come back to London," because I really loved London, and I was, I was having a ball, and I was in my early 20s, and I planned to go for 3 years, and never came back.
18 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
And so UEFA was really interesting times. They had just brought all of their kind of commercial department in-house. They had outsourced everything to an agency, and there was a massive scandal. You might have heard of it. It was a big FIFA UEFA scandal with an agency called ISL, and it was, you know, a big corruption scandal that had hit about a year before. So UEFA said, right, we're going to take everything in-house. And they hired a commercial team. And I was actually the first account manager that UEFA ever hired for that commercial team, working on the European Championships. So I was managing three big clients, McDonald's, Carlsberg, and Continental Tires, and worked on Euro 2004 and prepared for Euro 2008. And it was
Where were they? Remind me where they were again.
So yeah, Euro 2004 was Portugal.
Oh yeah.
And Euro 2008 was co-hosted in Switzerland and Austria. Now I left UEFA just before that tournament, but still did a lot of prep in the run up to it.
So that must be an amazing experience, was it? 2004.
It was incredible. It was incredible. And actually I was also seconded to FIFA to work on the World Cup in 2006. So I spent a couple of months in Germany, and I was managing the commercial rights in a stadium there. It was a crazy world, and all of my football fan friends and family, they thought I was living the dream at the time. You know, you're literally on a regular basis, you're meeting the most famous footballers. I've met Pele, I've met Eusebio, met Beckenbauer, met all the greats, and these would be just at regular events and things like that, and loads of travel. I mean, I traveled all over the world with UEFA, not just for tournaments, but also, you know, McDonald's was my client, and I got to go to Chicago a few times and to their headquarters and their conferences. Got to travel to Russia with Carlsberg. They had just done a big launch of a new brand in Russia. We were supporting them on something there, and it was absolutely amazing. And I was in my mid-20s and doing all this incredible travel.
And just my interest, do you love it then, the traveling part of the job?
The travel part, absolutely. And I think that'll always have to be a part of any of my jobs. Like I've been really lucky that since the word go, you know, since I first started my career, I've been traveling, and maybe I kind of subconsciously choose roles that will allow me to do that. So 2020 has been a bit nuts, actually, because it's the first time ever that I'm in a role where I'm not traveling.
And how'd you find that? I know a lot of people that are finding it tricky.
I thought I'd go demented, to be honest, because in 2019 I remember I had a 5-week spell of no travel, and myself and my husband nearly killed each other. And at the end of it, he said, do you not have a trip coming up? Because I think it's about time. You know? And so if you'd asked me at the start of 2020, you know, would you be able to handle no travel? My last trip in 2020 was end of February to Namibia. Wow. And that was a work trip. And I haven't had a work trip since. But I suppose my big thing was, one, there's no FOMO because no one else is traveling and you're missing nothing. Yeah. And two, it's something everybody has to do. You know, we have to do it for the greater good. And you know, we're in the middle of a major global pandemic and a crisis, so you just got to do it. So I actually just adapted.
Okay, and just out of curiosity, then, have you found that there's stuff in work that you can now do that you thought you had to do by traveling? How do you find it interacting with people?
There isn't. Yeah, there isn't because I work with 15 African countries, and normally I'd be visiting at least 10 of those every year. And spending about a week there, and that like being on the ground and personal contact and seeing the people you're working with all the time, it's invaluable. Now we've everything we've been doing has been virtual.
And just to let people know, you're with Shell now, and you work in Africa with Shell so
we have a partner that runs basically petrol stations in 15 countries in Africa. And I'm their key counterpart, if you like. It's like a franchise or a license where they're one partner managing all of that. So I work very closely with them all to help them run their business, to help, you know, ensure that the business is being run in the way we want. So if you go into a Shell petrol station in the UK or in France, you're going to have the same experience as a Shell petrol station in Uganda, for example.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think 2020, we've been able to do a lot virtually, and we've been able to innovate quite quickly, but I think you can't replace human contact. And you know, a lot of my colleagues in Africa have been saying, you know, we really want you to come and visit as soon as you can, and you know, we can catch up and we can talk business.
So I distracted you there with that question because I'm interested to go back to
To football, I
2004.
bet. Yeah.
Exactly. Because I want to hear about Portugal. So did you did you have to move to Portugal? Or
so well, I learned Portuguese as well.
Wow.
So I spent 2 years learning Portuguese to build up to living in Portugal for about 2 months. And actually working, I was managing a stadium, managing all the commercial rights in a stadium where quite a few local people didn't speak English.
Oh, really?
So I had to try and get
and
things
where
done
was
in
that in
Portuguese.
Portugal? Where were you?
That was in Porto.
Porto.
It was,
okay.
It was, yeah.
And that's really
so
interesting. So having the Portuguese you felt was crucial to the job.
Yeah, it was. And also just to help understand like who you're working with, because you have a huge team in Portugal on the ground that's delivering and getting the stadiums ready. And you know, you need to understand the, you know, the culture, the language, etc., to be able to work in, you know, efficiently with them. But Portugal was amazing, like absolutely amazing. Like when you're preparing for a big tournament, right? You spend a couple of years preparing, and then you're on the ground. And the moment you arrive on the ground maybe a month before your first match, and you're working, no word of a lie, sometimes you're working 20-hour days. So it sounds really glamorous, but it's really hard work. But you're having the most incredible experiences ever. Like you're getting ready for these matches where you could have 100 million people watching, you know, and you're responsible for a lot of things that are happening in that stadium.
And are you kind of swept up then in the whole emotion of it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the passion and the emotion, and you know, the host country, as they call it, you know, Portugal was the host country, and I don't think I've ever seen so much passion
really?
in my life. And you probably know that they lost the final. They made it to the final and they lost against Greece. And I was in the stadium at the time, and we were all crying our eyes out. Like it was, the emotion was just unreal, you know. And they'd worked so hard and gotten so far, and then lost. I mean, we were thrilled to see Greece win, but you know, when you're in that country and there's so much riding on it.
I remember you telling me a great story before. Was that during the Euros about, you know, the level of detail? You know, I think people find it really interesting. So when you say you're looking after a stadium, the level of detail.
My perimeter boards and things like
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Because it's so interesting.
So one of the things on the marketing side, you're responsible for all the commercial rights delivery in a stadium. And when you're a sponsor of a major tournament like that, one of the biggest things you're paying for, right? One of the most valuable rights you're paying for is the exposure on TV to hundreds of millions of people of your brand. And most of what people are seeing are the perimeter boards, you know, the advertising boards that you see around a stadium. What you don't realize is that there's a science, there's a huge amount of detail and science behind how that exposure works. So every second of full exposure of, let's say, a Coca-Cola logo in one of those matches has a value to it. And so at the end of the tournament, you know, you have to kind of guarantee a certain amount of exposure for your sponsors. And at the end of the tournament, they'll get a report. It'll be broken down into how many seconds and what the quality of the logo was, etc., and how well it was visible. And of course, these were the days before you had digital boards, so they're all static. So what we would have to do as the head of the commercial side in the stadium, the morning of the match or the day before the match, sometimes you'd go to the OB van, the outdoor broadcast van, and you'd have the match director working with you, and you'd be viewing from camera one, you'd be viewing all of the perimeter boards after they're set up. Now, camera one, in those days, the coverage of a match was fairly basic. So camera one would cover 80% of the match. So you're basically looking at these boards and you're on radio and you've got a guy on the ground and you're basically getting him to move the boards. It could be moving the boards by, you know, half a foot or something so that it looks much better on camera and the logo is much better featured. But then what you're responsible for is during the match is making sure that nothing happens to those boards. So they're like your babies, you know? And so you get mad stuff where people would throw something out of the crowd and they'd land on cover a board or a flag or something. And I had a couple of mad experiences. One was where the match had just kicked off and there was a photographer down at the goal line and he had just set up all his gear. He'd opened all his camera bags and set up all his gear. And he flung one of these bags, right, this big camera bag, he flung it over the perimeter board and it was covering the whole McDonald's logo. And I was looking at it from the other side of the pitch going, oh my God. Because if that sits there, it sits there for 45 minutes, and you get chance at half time. So I literally had to sprint down to the other side of the pitch, grab the bag, give the photographer a bit of a nudge and say, please don't do that to my boards. And then we had another one in Germany, and this was even crazier. Where
that was during the World Cup, wasn't it?
During the World Cup in 2006, yeah. And I had the same role in Kaiserslautern Stadium in Germany, and we had a local guy in the stadium. He was used to kind of, he was kind of the facilities manager for the league matches. And what they used to do for the league matches when FC Kaiserslautern would be playing, they'd put out all these massive buckets full of water all around the pitch, and they'd have sponges in them, and it'd be really so. If the players needed to kind of cool themselves down when they're playing, they'd be able to do that. But of course, no one had told this poor fella that when it's an international tournament, like things are a bit different and you don't do that. So just before the national anthem is playing and the teams have lined up and it's just before kickoff, and I suddenly see about 15 buckets positioned all in front of the perimeter boards all around the stadium. And I nearly died. And I literally had to get on the radio, get one of the guys. And now we wouldn't normally be allowed to do this, but we kind of had to just do it. We had to run around the stadium, get all the buckets, pour out the water, grab the sponges and jump over the boards and get out of the way of the TV camera. And you're trying to do all of this without getting on TV. You don't want to see someone in a FIFA uniform running around. So mad story.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. It's just the detail. People don't notice that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's so much that goes on, to get a match ready. And that's what I love is I love all the behind the scenes stuff that nobody knows about. And then the odd time you'd be on telly, I remember getting a text message once during Euro 2004 going, I can see you over in the corner on your radio.
So you went then from UEFA to Formula One, didn't you? I
went to F1, yeah. And I've had two roles in F1 actually. I worked for the Formula One group themselves, so literally for Bernie and his group. And
that's in Geneva.
That was in Geneva. And then I moved to what brought us to Zug actually was I moved to work for Shell, and Shell is a partner of the Ferrari team, and I was managing that partnership for Shell. The most interesting times were not working for F1 themselves, but actually working with a team, working with Ferrari, and actually getting to work with. So within 5 years, I managed to work with 4 world champion drivers. There was Fernando Alonso, Felipe Massa, Kimi Raikkonen, and Sebastian Vettel. And again, this is a lot of people's dream job. I'm not an F1 fan, I have to be honest, but I think it is an incredible sport, and there's a real passion for people who are F1 fans. And it's fascinating how it works. You can win a race by 100th of a second. And there's so many factors that can lead to you having that edge of that 100th of a second. And it's a lot about technology, which is great.
So when you're representing Shell in Formula One, you're right down that level. So they have a person in as part of the team practically to represent Shell. Is that the?
Yeah, well, so there was a few of us. So I was basically the commercial person managing the commercial side of the partnership.
You weren't putting petrol into the car then?
Well, actually, one of my colleagues was. So I had a couple of colleagues. So we would provide the fuel and the oil for the car, and it's not just about rocking up with a delivery and the fuel in a barrel and the oil in a drum. It's actually you're developing race fuels and race lubricants, and you're introducing you could introduce 4 or 5 new race fuels and lubricants during a season. Wow. A season which goes from March to November.
That there's teams of people working on it all the time.
And we would have up to about 25 fuel scientists and engineers in the background working on developing all these fuels and oils. But on the ground at the race, then you have a team of 2 to 3 people, and what they have to do is it's a lot of quality control. It's making sure that the fuels and the oils aren't contaminated, and that the testing the oils can tell you about what's going on in the engine before the engineers even know. So we'd have a really sophisticated lab in the back of the Ferrari garage. And what we're doing is we're able to tell the Ferrari engineers what's going on in the car, from what we're doing. Yeah, I mean, it was again a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but a lot of amazing times where you're actually in the garage during the race. You're part of all that excitement. You're under the podium when the Ferrari team wins. You're celebrating your driver. It's a crazy world of people. This traveling circus that travels the world pretty much nonstop from March to November, and goes to 4 continents.
And is it like a traveling circus then? Does everybody know everybody? And it's
absolutely,
and you all hang out with each other from place to place.
Everybody knows everybody in F1, and it's like any little community. You get all the gossip, and you get all the scandals, and all the who got off with who at the celebration on Sunday night of the last race. It's a small community. I have to say I loved it, but I also could see the dysfunction in it all as well.
It's a mad bubble.
When I started my mad F1 travel, I had just got married, so I was probably the most settled I've ever been. I think if I was in F1 in my 20s, in my single days, I'd probably self-destructed, because there's so much temptation. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, on speed.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I was newly married and very in a very stable part of my life. So I took part in a bit of the fun, but not a lot, I have to say.
But is it sort of because the people around it, it's such a glamorous sport, fashion and billionaires, so it must have a mad existence.
There's a bit of that. There's also, I suppose, the fact that you need to, again, it's a calling for most people. Most people are incredibly passionate. You'd have to be to work in F1 because you have no life. Okay. You've no family life. And a lot of people have, a lot of people are divorced, or, their relationships are broken up because of their commitment to F1. So it's kind of a work hard, play hard as well. People have to let off steam, and especially if you've won a race, there's a lot of celebrations. But there's a huge amount of glamour there as well, but not the same as the old days. So most of the drivers are fairly sensible, they're elite athletes, and you have to do an incredible amount of training. You have to have world-class levels of fitness to be a F1 driver and to do it well. But everyone around them does the partying for them.
I can imagine. And is there different, when you're going from, did you have a preference? Like, is there, like Monaco or Melbourne, or is there does every place have its own its own sort of, what's the word? Its own unique characteristics? Yeah,
absolutely. And most people will agree on what their favorite circuits are in F1, right? It's definitely not Monaco.
Is it not?
It is not Monaco. Monaco is one of the races that just drives everybody crazy, because usually, you have the most high level visitors and guests and everything in Monaco. The stress levels are really high. It's a street circuit, and it's really hard to get anything done in Monaco, because the whole of Monaco is built into a hillside. It's kind of down by the water, but it's on a hill, and so most of the roads are closed because of the circuit. So trying to get anything done, trying to organize an event in Monaco is a nightmare. You can't drive anywhere. So you have a 40-minute walk to get into the track every morning, or you can take a little water taxi. But it's quite challenging. Now, yes, there's the odd party on a yacht that's a bit of crack, and there's a lot of celebrities. But when you're working, it's really challenging. So I think the favorite circuits, I would say Monaco is probably a favorite circuit of the drivers to drive, because it's technically really challenging. The drivers will they like Monaco. It's very technical, very tricky. But if you've ever watched the Monaco Grand Prix, you can't pass. It's almost impossible to pass. So it's not one of those circuits where the outcome can be really surprising unless there's a crash or something. The ones that the drivers love they tend to be some of the really older circuits like Suzuka or Belgium. And again, it's very technically challenging, but also there are opportunities to pass, there are opportunities to change the outcome of a race. And then the people, so the entourage in F1, the circuits that tend to be preferred are what are called the street circuits. So this would be Melbourne, or this would be Canada, Montreal, Singapore. Because a street circuit is just so special because you're right in the center of a city, and you have such an amazing atmosphere. You're usually walking to the track. You don't have to drive. You feel the atmosphere in the city. And it just means your hotel is somewhere centrally located. You can go out at night and celebrate. And then for me, one of the worst places to stay is Suzuka in Japan, because it's a horrible grey industrial town. And even though there's loads of space there, you stay in a hotel that is, I swear to God, you couldn't swing a cat in it. I had a big suitcase that I couldn't put flat in my room because there wasn't enough floor space. So you're in like a capsule. It's like you'd have more space in a caravan. So it's funny, the places that you think might be really glamorous are often not.
And is it so? The way you've been talking there about UEFA and Formula One, it's a serious adrenaline. So your job, those jobs, it is like, particularly the Formula One, I would say, because you're going from it's high energy getting ready for the race, and then it's the high of it being over, then move on to the next place.
Yeah, it's true actually. And that's events in general, because I was in events for about 20 years, and it's highs and lows. And maybe that's part of my personality as well, is that I enjoy that mad adrenaline buzz,
Do you get used to it?
Yeah, you do. Now I have to say, for me, it's you can only really do that in your 20s and 30s. I did it a bit into my 40s. I think my role now working in Africa, it's a little bit different because it's a bit more stable. There's still loads of travel, but when I travel, I'm not working on events. I'm working fairly regular hours, and so it's a bit easier. Yeah. But you see people in F1 and they're still doing it into their 60s, 70s.
What recommendations would you give for, the best tracks to go to as a fan?
Yeah, in terms of, I suppose if people are looking for tips for F1 and circuits and races, I would say if you're going to go to any race, right, go to Belgium for lots of reasons. Right. The tickets are reasonably priced. It's easy to get to. You can get accommodation, within an hour of the track, and it's fairly reasonably priced. It's, as a spectator, it's an amazing circuit. And also there's usually a lot of excitement, in Belgium. So that would be a tip I would give if anyone is a fan and looking to go somewhere.
You've worked with some of the top drivers in the world. What are they like?
The drivers they're all like kids. I remember Stefano Domenicali talking to me once. He used to be the team principal of Ferrari, and he said, Annie, I see them like teenage boys. He said, I'm like their father. I might be the team principal, but I'm like their father. And these guys have been racing in karting since probably they were 7 or 8 years old. They're then thrown into maybe some of the feeder series for F1. And a lot of them are in F1 by the time they're 18 or 19. So he said, I have to not just be, their team principal. I almost have to be their father. I have to, sometimes they get a bit pissed off and the toys come out of the pram, or they sulk, or and I have to manage all of these moods of these kids to make sure I get the best out of them. And I thought that was really interesting. Like they're a world champion and they're world famous, and they have, thousands of fans screaming their names, but actually they need to be managed almost like a child.
Because they've probably been doing that from their early teens. They're probably being brought to races, given everything, all their schedules have been organised.
And they haven't had normal childhoods, because to get to that level, you've had to devote from the age of 6 or 7, you will have been racing nonstop. So it's again, you're dealing with very interesting personalities who haven't had normal lives at all.
And did that come across? Did you notice that when you were there? You did?
Yeah. And they're like, so I've worked with all four of those Ferrari drivers, and they're all very different. I would say genuinely the nicest and kindest of them all is Felipe Massa. He's, Brazilian driver, really, really nice and kind. One of the most difficult and challenging is Fernando Alonso. Loved his mind games, loved annoying you, loved kind of, being difficult when you're doing events with him. Kimi, absolute kind of so authentic and genuine, but won't do anything he doesn't want to do. Good story about Kimi that I can tell you is this didn't happen to me, but this poor journalist was interviewing Kimi many years ago. And it was when Michael Schumacher first left F1 before he came back again with Mercedes. And it was the Brazil Grand Prix, the end of the Brazil Grand Prix, Michael's last race. And they decided to do a tribute to Michael, and they got all the drivers. They basically arranged that all the drivers would come together for a photo with Michael on the starting grid at the end of the race. And this journalist, she realized that Kimi actually hadn't been there for the photo. And so she was interviewing him, about an hour later or whatever. And she said, "Hey, Kimi, what happened? You missed the tribute to Michael. You weren't in the photo." And Kimi, classic Kimi, responds and goes, "Yes, I had to take a shit." And so this is what I was dealing with when we would do PR events or whatever with Kimi, But I have to be honest, he was very straightforward. And then Sebastian Vettel, the first time I ever did an event with Seb, this really endeared him to me. He came out of his hotel, and I was waiting to pick him up and bring him, to the event we were delivering, and walked up to me, shook my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Sebastian." And I thought, what? Everybody knows who you are. You're a 7 times world champion. But I really appreciate the fact that you acknowledge me. You're human. We got into the car, chatting away, asking me about Ireland. And I just, that really endears you when you have to work with these guys and they can choose to be an arse or they can choose to be nice. That really endeared them to me.
You were with Shell, so then you moved areas in Shell. That's the tradition in Shell, isn't it? You move.
Well, it's like any big global company. You see it a lot with like the Procter and Gambles and the Unilevers and lots of big global companies. We're a company of about 100,000 employees. And so if you want to keep people fresh and keep people, with career progression, you move everyone every 4 years or so. So I actually did 5 years in my Ferrari role, which was a bit longer than planned. And then I moved, and the first time in 20 years, I was working in a role that wasn't sports marketing. So it's a commercial role, and it's managing a partnership in Africa, as I mentioned, across 15 countries.
So that must be brilliant for someone who loves travel.
Yeah.
Get to go to Africa. So how many?
And I already loved Africa. I think before that role, we did our honeymoon in Malawi. And I'd already traveled to maybe 10, 12 countries before I did this role.
Okay.
And now that's gone up, I think, to about 20. And huge fan of Africa, I have to say. It's just so different. It's so different. And actually, my African colleagues would kill me for saying Africa, because it's like saying Europe. There's over 50 countries, and there's so many different cultures and different tribes. And, you'll have somebody in Kenya will tell you South Africa is not Africa, and there's all kinds of rivalries and everything. I think, what is it about Africa? Every country is so different. People are. I'll make a few generalizations. People tend to be much more positive and much less cynical than we Europeans, I find. Much happier as well. And regardless of what they have or what kind of level they're at. A little bit like Ireland in the 50s, religion is very, very strong and plays a major part in everyone's life, So religion plays a major role in everyone's life. And sometimes it's Christianity, it's Muslim religion, lots of different religions. What else about Africa? I suppose it is, there's so much diversity there, it's in terms of landscape, in terms of things you do, the kinds of people you meet. So
How is it
yeah,
working there? Like, is it very different working in
it's
Europe versus Africa?
again, there's a lot of similarities to Ireland,
Is there
or
really?
or the Ireland that I would have known, in terms
Yeah.
of, in most countries, if someone says, yeah, so I'll see you there at 10 o'clock. And this could be a meeting, or this could be, this could be something really serious that you have to do. 10 o'clock could mean any time before 11. It'd be like, I remember from when I was a teenager in Ireland, you meet at the pub, I see you there at 9 o'clock, and it could be any time after.
Still hasn't changed.
So I find that is quite difficult to get used to, especially living in Switzerland, because in Switzerland, if it's 10 o'clock, you turn up at a minute to 10, and not a minute later. Working there as well, yeah. I mean, you would never jump into a meeting or a call or anything without first of all saying, oh Jesus, how's your mother's cousin's uncle, and oh, is the dog better? I heard, you told me last week the dog wasn't well. And you literally have 10 minutes of chat,
So that's great. So that's where an Irish person really must connect.
And so the American way of jumping straight in and going, right, let's get down to business, that's actually considered really, really rude.
Yeah.
And I would be used to the American way of working, so I've had to adapt a lot to kind of, just taking the personal touch, and making sure that that's important.
And are there particular countries that are in your heart then in Africa that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it changes all the time, because every time I go to a country and spend some time there, it becomes my new favorite.
Yeah.
But actually, at the moment, the one I would hugely recommend to anyone is Uganda.
Oh, really?
And Ian and I were really lucky. About 2 years ago, I had a trip there, and it coincided with it happened just before Easter. And so we decided after my trip that Ian would fly out, and we did a 2-week tour of Uganda. And it's definitely one of my favorite countries. The people are absolutely gorgeous, like gorgeous, warm, funny, friendly, beautiful people. And everywhere we went, we were welcomed. Now, again, when you get into the countryside, you're the only white person for miles around, and actually I've gotten very used to being the only white person. So you also have to be very careful, and you have to make sure you don't have that savior complex as well that a lot of Europeans have when they go to Africa, and try and just behave normally,
Yeah.
But what else about Uganda? I love the food. We got to try a lot of local food.
Okay.
And actually, funnily enough, whenever I travel to Africa and I'm hosted, or we go out for dinner with my colleagues, they always seem to want to bring me to places with burgers and pizzas and, kind of Western places where a lot of the expats go, because they want Western food. And
Yeah.
so after a while, I had to say to them, lads, please, will you bring me somewhere local? I really don't want a burger or a pizza when I come to, Ghana or Namibia or wherever.
Yeah.
But the local food in Uganda, we absolutely loved as well.
And did you go see is that where the gorillas? Did you go see them?
Yes,
the gorillas in the mist?
yeah. I was coming to that.
Well, I'm eager, because that's all. When I hear Uganda,
I'm waffling.
No, not at all.
No,
it's just when I hear Uganda,
yeah.
I just think gorillas.
One of the most amazing experiences of my life was actually going to see the gorillas, and this is in a place called Bwindi in southwest Uganda. It's almost on the border with Rwanda, and so most of the mountain gorillas that are surviving, in the world are in Rwanda, Uganda, and DRC, Democratic Republic Congo. Safest place to see them, I think, is Uganda. And I'd say also one of the best managed and the cheapest, because in Uganda, the government runs the program. So the money you pay goes back into the government running it. In Rwanda, I know they recently sold the rights to a private American company, and I think it's twice the price, to go and see them. And DRC, I wouldn't recommend at the moment because it's quite dangerous. Okay. So if you're going to go see the gorillas, go in Uganda. You have to book a long time in advance, because they only take a limited number of people, and what they're doing is they take you're put into groups, and you're basically trekking for a few hours through proper tropical jungle, so mad stuff, like you they give you all this advice that you have to seal your trousers in your socks, and you're tucking into your waistbands, because there's all these fire ants that you're walking through the jungle, and they literally can get inside your clothes, and then once they're inside, you're done. You're going to be eaten alive by fire ants. And it's really, really humid. It's proper tropical humid jungle, and you've got guides with machetes and guns, and sometimes they're actually breaking through the dense jungle with machetes. But really well managed. And so you're basically trekking and climbing for a few hours, and they're on radios, and they're basically following a family of gorillas, and the gorillas, they're already in some way acclimatized to humans, so they make sure it's fairly safe for you. But it's just the most incredible experience in the world. And my first contact with a gorilla, it was hilarious, because there were all these eager beavers in the group, so there's a group of about 8 of us, and me and Ian. So Ian and I said, look, we'll just hang out at the back, and we'll see them when we see them. And we had a guide with a gun behind us at one point, and then she moved up to the front. So there's just Ian and I at the back. And at one point we're wandering along, and the group is a fair bit ahead of us. And I heard this crunching behind me, like I heard something moving, and I thought, oh, maybe the guide is back behind me. And I turned around, and no word of a lie, there was a 3-meter high silverback gorilla about 5 meters behind me. And he was just standing there looking at me, and I was like, Ian, Jesus, gorilla. And he's standing there, and suddenly then the guides below us became aware that he was there. So I got out my camera, and I started videoing, and then hilariously, he lets out this fart that goes on for about 25 seconds. It's literally like non-stop. And I caught it all on video, and I'm pissing myself laughing, going, I thought this would be this kind of spiritual moment with this gorilla, and all he does is, because apparently they fart constantly, because they eat vegetation all the time. So and then he decided he wanted to walk down past us, and you're not allowed to get too close to them, not because it's dangerous for you, but because it's dangerous for them, because gorillas can catch the flu, colds, even COVID. Actually, they can get respiratory illnesses and catch them from humans, because they're so close to us. So he's literally walking, and he's about to walk on top of me, regardless of whether I'm in his way or not. And the guide is saying, get out of the way, he's coming down. So he literally walks right by me, and it was just the most incredible experience. And then we discovered this whole family of gorillas, and the little babies swinging in the trees. But absolutely incredible experience. And they're very gentle. Are they
human-like?
They're very human-like. I mean, they have facial expressions, and you, like, I got so close to this fella, and I could have sworn he was talking to me. He was probably farting on purpose, just to tell me, this is what I think of you.
Is there any other spot then in our countries, say in Africa? You've been so many. You say you've been to 20. So what's the first one that comes into your head?
God,
So I had Uganda, I mentioned Malawi. So one more. What's the first one that comes into your head?
The first one comes into my head is probably because it's the most recent one I visited, is Namibia. And Namibia, absolutely stunning country. I mean, Namibia has it's kind of where the desert meets the sea. You've heard of the Namib Desert.
Yeah.
And I got to spend some time by the coast. I added on a few days on my last trip and got to spend some time by the coast. It's a place called Swakopmund. And I went into the desert, had a few activities there, but you have these like 60, 70 meter sand dunes right by the Atlantic Ocean. Absolutely nuts, and really amazing diversity of wildlife there. You can do some amazing trips. So I would definitely recommend Namibia if you've never been.
And what about safaris? Do you like them or not? Or have you done loads of them? Or
I've done loads of them, and I love them. I absolutely love them. Yeah. I never get bored. There's another one I'd recommend, which is, again, I added on a few days to a trip in South Africa about 2 years ago, and I stayed in a treehouse just outside Kruger Park.
Okay.
And so you're literally sleeping in a tree, and it's just this little wooden construction with a bed in it.
Uh-huh.
And that is an incredible experience. And you go to sleep and it's like white noise in the background. You hear all the bullfrogs and all the animals and everything. And I woke up in the morning and there was a herd of buffalo right below my treehouse. And then like a little bit, then suddenly they ran off. And I was like, why are they running off? A lion right below.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it's kind of slightly dangerous, but I kind of like that as well. I like that little edge of danger. So I would always recommend safaris as well. And again, I would recommend responsible travel because that your money is being put to good use.
You remind me, we went to Tanzania for our honeymoon, and we went on three different.
Oh, wow.
We went to three different types, but the one I really loved was it was a tent, and it was by a river, and all the animals would come up, for sunset up to the river, and that was my favorite. So if I ever go again, I would love to just go somewhere and hang out there, because I wasn't too into getting into the van at the crack of dawn, driving around finding animals. I much preferred just going to a spot and staying there and letting the animals come and go. So
and they come to you,
and seem more natural. Chasing around trying to tick off animals. I wasn't up for that, especially early in the morning on our honeymoon. But that's the one I loved, and that's what I'd go back to. So something like that, where you just chill and you're in a nice spot, and then the animals, be in the middle of them in a tent or treehouse or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what really comes across from this talk is that your love of travel, obviously, and you're lucky because your job gets you to do all that travel. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. There's one question, which is Emer's question, which I'd have to ask you. So important. You know Emer very well. So it is, if you take 4 deep breaths and think of your happy place anywhere in the world, in your travels or at home, wherever, where would that be and why?
It's a really good question, and it changes all the time. even thinking about the answer to this, I have so many different answers, but I think if it's winter, it would always be up a snowy mountain somewhere, and it would be probably skiing backcountry. So I would say Verbier is probably my favorite place for that. It's just pure happiness when you discover a patch of virgin snow that no one else has skied, and there's nobody around, and you're the first person to ski down that. In summer, it's also going to be a mountain, and it's at the moment it will definitely be a mountain in Switzerland, and it's probably Mount Rigi, which is a mountain near where we live. And you get to the top of that and you just look out over about 4 lakes, and you're looking out over about 5 counties, and it's just on a clear day, it's exquisite, and it's kind of my happy place. So
I've seen some great photos of yours from your walks up the mountains, and it's spectacular because people think of the Alps for skiing, but in summertime it is amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. So if anyone wants to come and visit, they're very welcome once times are a bit safer.
I would ask if you could please subscribe to Apple Podcast, so a new episode will appear in your library every week. I would also really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review, as it helps others to discover this podcast. To find out who's on every Tuesday, please follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Travel Tales with Fergal. Stay safe and keep dreaming of future travels.
Travel Tales with Fergal.